Can I invite everyone to take their seats? Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to COP, day 436. My name's Eric Pawlowski. I'm a vice president at the Rockefeller Foundation, and I'll be your moderator today. And we're going to start by turning to Dr. Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank Group.
Thank you very much, Eric. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all very warmly to this landmark event on leveraging the SDRs for climate and development. Special thanks to the COP28 presidency and the governments of France and Japan for co-hosting this event with the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank with my brother, Alan. The reform of the global financial architecture must respond effectively to the rising fiscal costs facing countries to accelerate their development. To do so, we also need to adapt the instruments in the global financial architecture themselves, specifically the special drawing rights. To complement the IMF's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust and the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, the African Development Bank and the American Development Bank developed a third option, which entails the rechanneling of SDRs through the multilateral development banks. There are three advantages to the MDB SDR rechanneling option. First, thanks to their unique business model, the MDBs can multiply by at least 4 times the SDRs allocated to them. This will transform the SDRs from static foreign reserve assets into dynamic lending instruments at affordable cost to finance development. The proceeds can also be used to support critical development challenges, including climate adaptation, food security, health, education, and infrastructure. They can also be used to boost capital resources for other public development banks. And I want to thank them for being here today. Second, the SDR allocation under the option will be at zero cost to the taxpayers in the SDR-rich countries. The MDBs will pay the SDR interest rate that the IMF charges to countries that use or lend their SDRs. Third, the option assures the reserve asset status of the SDRs, which means the SDR donor countries or rich countries can still account for them for the SDRs as reserves. Given the strong political advocacy for the voluntary rechanneling of SDRs to MDBs by the African Union, the G7 and G20, and several of you that are here today that are big advocates of this, and I'm grateful, Ilana and I are very grateful to you, it is now time to collectively make this happen. I am very pleased that the IMF staff have been very supportive on this option, and I've indicated that it meets the reserve asset quality requirement for SDRs. What is needed now is to have 5 SDR providing countries that will rechallenge the SDRs to the African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and other MDBs. Countries that are unable, however, to do the SDR rechanneling can participate through the liquidity support agreement that will guarantee SDR contributions in the unlikely event of a balance of payment need. This is a crucial moment. Let us don't hope that this will bring into reality, a reality that will leverage the SDRs to deliver tens of billions of dollars in support of development. And then maybe the SDRs will qualify to also be called supporting development revitalization. That's also SDR. Together, let's make this happen. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your support.
Thank you. So, Dr. Goldfein, do you want to welcome our guests?
Yes. Thank you. I'm just going to be very short because our partner in this endeavor, President Adesina, have the African Development Bank, and his team have said it all. I just want to thank the COP presidency for prioritizing this discussion. Of course, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Center for Global Development, several of the governments here with their help. You know that the G7, G20 have called the MDBs to do more with what we have, to innovate, to rethink how to use and how to maximize our resources and our impact. So this is what we're doing, just to remind you that this is exactly what we're doing, and this is the reason we are thinking of rechanneling the SDR. And the reason this meeting is here is that this is exactly the place to talk about rechanneling SDRs, because this is critical to help us advance our climate agenda. That is the way we can scale up our investment in the countries in climate mitigation, adaptation, and nature. So without further ado, what I really want is to pass to our moderator, because we want to hear from you, and we'll come back at the end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bowley. I want to turn to you first, as the IMF has been working extremely collaboratively alongside the AFDB and the IDB on this proposal, and the IMF's view on this is critical securing country support. Can you update us on the work?
Thank you, Eric. Following the historic 2021 $650 billion SDR allocation, the IMF has been actively engaged with its membership to identify viable options for the voluntary channeling of SDRs from countries with strong external positions to poorer and more vulnerable countries. In addition to SDR channeling to the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust and Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, we have been engaging with several MDBs on the design of mechanisms to channel SDRs to them directly, including African Development Bank and the Inter-America Development Bank. In February 2023, the IMF approved 5 new MDBs as prescribed holders of SDRs who can participate in SDR transactions and authorized operations, including the Inter-America Development Bank, IDB, the EIB, EBRD, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Development Bank of Latin America. This brings the total number to 20, including, of course, the African Development Bank, which is already a long-standing prescribed holder of SDRs. Over the past 18 months, IMF staff has collaborated with AFDB and IDB colleagues, sharing experiences and providing technical advice as they develop their proposal to channel SDRs as hybrid capital to expand MDB lending to developing countries. The proposal, which is now well advanced thanks to the dedicated and trailblazing work of AFDB and IDB team, is underpinned by a liquidity support agreement among contributors and by a multi-layered credit risk management framework. These are broadly modeled after features of the IMF's SDR channeling mechanism for the RST and PRGT. Based on our staff's assessment, the hybrid capital instrument proposed by the AFDB and IDB, with the intended minimum number of contributors with strong external positions, would meet the reserve asset quality requirements. This is a key feature to enable participation by potential SDR holders. On the side of the IMF, an executive board decision would be required to authorize the use of SDRs for the acquisition of hybrid capital instruments issued by MDBs. IMF staff is currently advancing the required technical work, and it is our intention to bring this matter for consideration for the executive board in the next several months. I would like to congratulate the AFDB and IDB on taking the lead in developing a concrete proposal to channel SDRs to MDBs. Successful implementation of the proposal would be an important contribution to amplify the positive impact of the historical 2021 SDR allocation for the benefit of developing countries. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you both. The French have been early partners on this initiative, and so it's my pleasure to introduce this video from Emmanuel Moulon, the Director General of the French Trésor, confirming their public support.
Dear colleagues, I'm not able to join you today in Bali, but the event convened by President Adesina and President Goldfein is of utmost importance. I have three messages for you today. First, SDR channeling has magnified the positive impact of the 2021 SDR allocation for developing countries. From the beginning, France has been a strong supporter of SDR channeling, and this topic was front and center at the Paris Summit for a new global financing pact in June. Pledges have met the global ambition of $100 billion thanks to SDR channeling. The PRGT and the RST have now significant resources for supporting developing countries. Second, SDRs are not a magic wand to all the issues we face. They must keep the reserve asset status, but on some conditions, MDBs can make the best of SDRs for the financing of the green transition and of development. The African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank have put forward a very solid proposal for SDR channeling through a hybrid capital instrument with the help of the IMF. I want to thank President Adesina, President Goldfein, and Managing Director Georgieva for all the work done for this proposal. Third, France cannot channel SDRs through MDBs given the European regulations. However, we can find solutions to provide support for the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. On behalf of Minister Bruno Le Maire, I am pleased to announce that France is ready to take part to the liquidity support agreements through the issuance of a guarantee. We hope that it will encourage other countries to either invest in hybrid capital or to provide a guarantee. To conclude, we have a possible solution as part of the toolkit for the financing of climate and development. Now we have to make it alive. Thank you, and I hope that today's meeting will be fruitful for delivering on SDR channeling through MDBs.
Thank you. Now I want to turn to Japan, one of our most esteemed co-hosts here, to update us on their close collaboration with the AFDB and the IDB to operationalize this proposal. Mr. Tomo Yahagi.
Thank you very much. President Adesina, President Goldfein, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. On behalf of the Government of Japan, let me express my sincere gratitude to all the participants here. It is a great honor to co-host this roundtable on leveraging special drawing rights for climate and development. The world is facing multiple crises and shocks, including recovering from the economic impacts of the pandemic, food and energy insecurity, fragility and conflicts, and natural disasters, to name just a few. The poorest countries and vulnerable communities in Africa have been hit the hardest, and its impact could last longer than in other parts of the world. Further, more financial resources are needed to address global challenges, such as climate change. Many in the international community are committed to achieving net zero or carbon neutrality by 2050. Africa, likely to be the fastest growing continent in the coming decades, is expected to play its part for reaching this goal and achieving the 1.5 degrees target of the Paris Agreement. For tackling these global challenges, we see the African Development Bank playing a pivotal role in helping member countries expand their capacities to respond and implement needed reforms. At the same time, financial resources are often scarce in donor countries, which are also facing huge pressure from their own taxpayers for increasing the expenditure needs for domestic economic recovery and development. Against this backdrop, we welcome an innovative instrument proposed by the African Development Bank to rechannel SDRs to MDBs in line with the G20 CAF recommendation. Japan emphasized at the last AFDB annual meetings that it is considering participating in SDR channeling to the AFDB. Since then, we have actively engaged with officials from the AFDB and the Inter-American Development Bank, along with the Rockefeller Foundation. Meanwhile, the Asian Development Bank's management brought up a similar proposal to its board, and I understand the IDB is exploring the possibility too. While we are now in the process of clarifying the details, widespread participation is obviously one of the key conditions to give channeled SDRs to MDBs without currency status. In that vein, taking this opportunity, I encourage other donors, both member and non-member countries, to participate in the framework as either potential investors or participants to the liquidity backstop facility. Japan is happy to continue collaborating with these MDBs and will be accelerating our best efforts to make a contribution to the proposed hybrid capital in the foreseeable future if all the conditions are met. Finally, let me reiterate that this SDR initiative is a great example to showcase the strong partnership between MDBs and their member countries for the purpose of overcoming the financial constraint and delivering the most needed financial resources to achieve the SDGs. We must take decisive action to give Africa an opportunity to shine and unleash its full potential. It is time to turn words into action. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tomo. I will now turn to Her Excellency Minister Calvino from Spain to share the Spanish position on this, particularly with regard to the liquidity support agreement. I think we have a video.
Climate change is one of the key challenges of our time, and we need to tackle it together. More frequent and violent natural disasters, drought and fires are amongst the most visible symptoms, with a huge economic impact for most vulnerable countries that need to devote an increasing share of public and private resources to mitigate the damage, rebuild, and also adapt and be more resilient for the future. That's why the international agenda, through the high-level meetings of G20, Bretton Woods institutions, and COP, is focusing more and more on the reinforcement of our global financial safety net through the modernization of multilateral institutions and the mobilization of massive resources for climate action. Spain has been in the lead to support the reinforcement of the firepower of multilateral institutions and the creation of new instruments which are fit for purpose. And we put our money where our mouth is, with significant contributions to multilateral financial instruments to support most vulnerable countries. This week, we have agreed to invest 12 million euros in the 2 UN dedicated funds for least developed countries and climate change. A more ambitious rechanneling of special drawing rights, or SDRs, is clearly one of the tools we should work on. As chair of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the IMF, I have been very vocal about the need to rechannel SDRs to most vulnerable economies. We pushed for the creation of the Resilience and Sustainability Trust to help low-income and vulnerable middle-income countries too increase their resilience to external shocks and ensure sustainable growth. Spain was the first country to contribute to this trust with 1.8 billion euros. At the recent IMF and World Bank annual meetings in Marrakesh, Spain reaffirmed our support to the multilateral framework, increasing from 20 to 50% our commitment to rechannel our SDR allocation. There is no room for complacency because we face very significant global challenges that require our urgent attention, ranging from climate change to digitalization, dealing with large-scale migration flows, and food and energy insecurities, amongst others. And of course, most vulnerable economies need our support in this process. Multilateral development banks have a crucial role to play. They can leverage additional finance and crowd in much-needed private investments. The innovative proposal of the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank is most welcome and looks promising in this regard. It could potentially multiply rechanneled SDRs by at least 3 to 4 times the original values. Let me close with a call for action so that we explore these and any other feasible options to help unlock a significant amount of funding towards those countries that need it the most. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations.
The UK has had a long history of collaboration with the AFDB, including collaboration on the Room to Run guarantee, and we're an early supporter of this proposal. I will now turn to His Excellency Minister of State Mitchell to update us on the UK position.
Thank you very much indeed. I must apologise to everyone for being late, but I was at an earlier meeting on the Green Climate Fund, so please accept my apologies. It's clear that the international community needs to use all the levers at our disposal to support countries in achieving their development goals. So I'm delighted to join this discussion and commend the African Development Bank for these innovative proposals to maximise the value of SDR rechanneling. I'm also grateful for their constructive and open-minded approach in sharing their ideas and technical work across a number of MDBs. The ambition to rechannel SDRs was first agreed at the Carbis Bay Summit during Britain's G7 presidency. This was followed by the G20 commitment to channel 20% of the 2021 allocation to poor and vulnerable countries. Britain was one of the first countries to deliver on its pledge to channel 20% of SDRs when the Chancellor signed agreements with the IMF worth SDR 4 billion at the spring meetings this year, worth something like $5.3 billion. The AFDB's proposal on utilising SDR to purchase hybrid capital provides a unique mechanism to leverage value multiple times to help deliver projects spanning education, health, green infrastructure, and other vital sectors. It is in keeping with Britain's determination to use innovative means to expand the multilateral development bank's balance sheets, and I'm pleased that a number of our partners are interested in participating in that proposal. We will continue to work with the AFDB to identify additional ways to support their development agenda, including exploring the possibility of augmenting the SDR facility with a liquidity support arrangement, considering how the proposal could be adapted to ensure contributions are eligible as official development assistance and how the facility would be activated in practice. We will also support other countries to explore how they could participate, and I would like to recognise the work of the Inter-American Development Bank in this space as well. Britain is a firm champion and supporter of the AFDB and its outstanding president, and I sincerely hope that with further detailed work, this rechanneling proposal can be delivered, benefiting those countries most in need of support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Mitchell. We are lucky today to be joined by an expert on all of these matters. Most often lately he's called minister, but I prefer to call him professor. His Excellency Cabinet Secretary Njugu. Would you like to weigh in?
Thank you very much, and I apologize for being late. I think there are so many conflicting and late meetings that are coming through. But I think my position, in agreement with what is going on, is actually to emphasize maybe three main points that are quite critical in terms of creating space, or should I say, creating justification for this. And the first point is that I've been looking at even countries like Kenya, for example. In 1 year, we have moved from one extreme of extreme drought, which we haven't seen for 40 years. And in the same year, we have now an extreme flooding situation, El Nino. So in a sense, what we have seen is that the first impact is that you rechannel funds that are available, that is the fiscal resources that are available to actually save lives. And in 1 year, we have rechanneled resources to save lives because of drought. And in the same year, we have rechanneled resources to save lives because of El Nino. So in a sense, you find yourself that you find that the African countries are buffeted by constraints in terms of current expenditure, but also they devour the development expenditure. And devouring the development expenditure is very, very critical because it actually robs the country's capacity for future growth. You can imagine the impact. It's not only for the current expenditures, but even capacity for future growth. It becomes quite problematic. The second point that we actually use to actually justify what is happening is actually during those kind of catastrophic events, the economic activity, the vibrancy of the economic activity is actually curtailed. So it means that you're generating low resources from tax revenues, but you have high demand in terms of public resources to safeguard the economy, as well as even support the recurrent spending and development spending. You can imagine, so what we are seeing is a picture of a trap, a low equilibrium trap, if you may, in terms of where we are in terms of development discourse. So it becomes quite problematic. Then it means that what we are listening from, especially coming from the African Development Bank, is a very innovative way of supporting resources, a basket of resources that can actually help us move out of this trap, resource trap. It's going to be very, very important, not only in the development discourse, but it's also going to be very, very important in terms of waking up some of the finances that are required to shape the future. I do believe that this is a very, very important program. I do believe that it is its own innovativeness that is driving even supporters of this program. And I do believe that this is the best way to actually reclaim our position in terms of focusing on climate action that is going to help the future development discourse of the African economies, to be very specific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. It's now our pleasure to be joined by His Excellency Mr. Ka. Senegal has been a leading voice in Africa and across the world on climate finance. Can I ask you to share your perspectives?
Thanks a lot. Excellences, honorables invités, mesdames et messieurs, tout d'abord, je souhaite féliciter les Émirats arabes unis pour l'organisation de la COP28. Comme vous l'avez rappelé, notre continent est directement touché par des catastrophes climatiques, comme l'a rappelé mon collègue du Kenya, exacerbant les nombreux défis qui freinent et ralentissent son développement. Ces changements ont des effets dévastateurs sur nos économies et nos environnements, accentuant leur vulnérabilité et menaçant la vie de millions de nos concitoyens. Par conséquent, l'orientation d'une part substantielle des SDR vers des initiatives climatiques est justifiée. Ces fonds peuvent contribuer au développement des secteurs prioritaires pour nos pays, tels que l'éducation, la santé, le développement industriel, les infrastructures durables, essentielles pour améliorer la qualité de vie de nos populations et créer ainsi des opportunités d'emploi. Ainsi, notre stratégie propose la réallocation des ressources disponibles à travers des canaux spécifiques, notamment les banques multilatérales africaines, telles que la Banque africaine de développement et la Banque ouest-africaine de développement, afin de faciliter leur mobilisation. Ceci répond à l'appel de son Excellence, Monsieur le Président Macky Sall et d'autres leaders pour une réallocation des SDR afin de répondre aux défis de développement de l'Afrique et aux attentes de nos populations. C'est pour remédier à ces asymétries que je lance aujourd'hui un appel pour une réallocation plus juste et équitable des SDA au profit des économies les plus vulnérables, à travers notamment la Banque africaine de développement, la BOAD et les autres initiateurs de cette table ronde. Nous proposons également aux partenaires du G20 la création d'un système de suivi. C'est important parce que la mise en œuvre est un enjeu majeur, donc un système de suivi transparent pour contrôler et superviser l'évolution de cette réallocation. Mesdames et messieurs, je suis convaincu que ces actes forts seront posés pour une réaffectation optimisée des SDA à l'issue de cette COP 28 face aux défis pressants de notre continent. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to and invite State Secretary Nicolini to share a perspective from Argentina with us.
Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. In this segment of the event, I'm the only Latin American in this panel, so I have the pleasure and responsibility of bringing the voice of my region. A region that, as you all know, is crossed by global asymmetries that the climate change agenda represents, and also a region that can undoubtedly provide solutions to the challenges that we face. We hold the highest rates of ecosystem conservation, and we provide ecosystem services for all humanity. We are home to 60% of the world's biodiversity, according to UNEP, and 50% of the world's primary forest, according to FAO. And countries like mine face this with heavy debt burdens resulting from historical development asymmetries, which destabilize our economy and limit our ability to access financing. So how can we increase our efforts and ambition if we have limited resources and cooperation funds to care for our forest? Prime Minister Mia Mottley from Barbados said at the Leaders' Summit this day, we should not have to choose between the people and the planet. And there is no doubt that we have to put all our creativity at the service of generating effective solutions. And that is why we welcome initiatives such as the IMF RST and the announcement by the COP28 presidency to provide 200 million in SDRs, and the great work that the IDB is doing in the region, especially for Argentina, a great ally for us in this agenda. But also, how do we ensure that the efforts and commitments that countries make by contributing to such funds turn into concrete solutions on time when communities really need them? Just to share an example, in Argentina we have promoting for years the use of SDRs to alleviate the debt burden and to be able to allocate our resources to solve the problem of our people. Actually, me personally, we have been working with the IMF to access the RST for climate projects, but with no success at all. And recently, we heard Managing Director Georgieva offer to the elected President of Argentina the possibility of accessing the RST. So, given that he is a publicly climate change denier, hopefully this could be a very smart way to keep him committed to this agenda. We already have the vehicles to channel SDR to the country most vulnerable to climate change. So it is time to allocate sufficient resources to them. And then another important issue to evaluate is accessibility, the amount of time and processes required to access the fund. We face with that challenge. I don't know if other countries are also facing that problem. I think that is something very key in this meeting to discuss. In our experience, previous negotiations and requirements, it make it incompatible with the political time of the countries. And finally, it is worth mentioning the particularity of middle-income countries. Always heard about the middle-income countries trap, such as the one for Argentina, which seems that we are not poor enough to access this mechanism, and of course not rich enough to make it on our own. So, colleagues, perfection is the enemy of reality. We have to be brave. We have been testing pilots of financial tools for years. So let's dare to test them on a large scale and get closer to win this race against climate change. Thank you.
Now let me turn to UN Undersecretary General Li Zhuanhua, who represents the Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to share the UN's perspective on leveraging SDRs for climate and development, and very grateful to the co-hosts. As we all know that last September, all leaders gathered in New York to take stock on the progress of the SDGs. But we have to confess that the result is very, very sobering. Only 15% of the SDG targets are on track, and more than 30% have either stalled or regressed. And now we were talking about the severe consequences of the climate change. So the Secretary General actually has called all of us to stop our war on nature and to massively invest in sustainable development. So this COP28 event on financing for climate and development is very, very timely and important as the world looks to confront these existential threats. Well, we all know financing will drive the transformation, and we need to explore and pursue all possible options to enhance the global capacity to invest. MDBs hold the greater potential to scale up the financing needed to address the sustainable development crisis. MDBs can deliver large volumes of the finance aligned to the SDGs and country investment needs, with a long-term horizon and low costs. But however, many MDBs are capital constraints. For these, SDR provides one of the tools we can use alongside capital increases and the reforms of their capital adequacy frameworks. The call has been made for $100 billion worth of additional SDRs to be rechanneled through the MDBs. And the AFDB and the IADB have led this response. Their innovative hybrid capital instruments for rechanneled SDRs deserved all our support. UN calls on all countries with unused SDRs to pledge support and conclude a contribution agreement to the AFDB and the IDB. Dear colleagues, SDR rechanneling is only one urgent step to take to address the shortfall of the affordable financing for developing countries. Secretary General also proposed an SDG stimulus, which will deliver an additional $500 billion in financing annually. Secretary General also set out the proposal to finally address the long-standing gaps and flaws in the current international financial architecture. To put it in very simple, this financial architecture is not fit to address the challenges of the 21st century. So the IFA reform has to start with the concrete steps to achieving a more inclusive, representative, and ultimately more effective global economic governance. This reform also includes a revamp of the roles and use of the SDRs. UN stands ready to look forward to working very closely with all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. The mission of the International Fund for Agricultural Development is to eradicate poverty and hunger in developing countries. President Lario, please share with us the role that SDRs could play in making this a reality.
And thank you for having us here. We have very much supporting both African Development Bank and Inter-American Development Bank under teams also led by Saih4d and Gustavo, because I think they have been very creative. So I think the solutions are already there. For us now it's a matter of really a political breakthrough. We know what the constraints were with central banks, and we very much encourage the urgency. I think we cannot wait for another COP to have this. And we're talking now about very limited, I would say, technical issues. So as the France representative, Director General, has said, I mean, the technical elements are very solid. And this is an instrument that also supports countries with limited fiscal space, decreased allocation of development. So I think guarantees, SDRs, are very important at the scale and the multiplication. In our case, we have been very much advocating for the success. It can open doors. We are at IFA, we are an UN agency, but we also prescribe SDR holder. Our balance sheet is in SDR, can support small-scale farmers, can support security, climate adaptation. So we very much think now it's the time to really have a political breakthrough. We are talking about a very limited number of countries in the case of the liquidity support agreement. And I think many of the other issues have been already there. So we really want to make sure that we do not get to another COP with this agreement. It can be a size and a speed that can really make a difference for a lot of the MDBs and DFIs. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now turn to Roberta Casali, our colleague from the Asia Development Bank.
You hear me? President Adesina, President Goldfein, distinguished participants, thanks for the invitation and very good morning. Like other MDBs, and in line with the G20 expert panel recommendations on multilateral development banks' capital adequacy framework, ADB is striving to optimize its balance sheet. And last September, we approved our new capital adequacy framework, which unlocks $100 billion in new funding capacity over the next decade to address Asia-Pacific overlapping simultaneous crises, especially climate change. I commend the African Development Bank and Inter-American Development Bank for having taken the lead on this topic, on the topic that we deal today, SDR. And like them, we are also exploring the SDR rechanneling option to further increase our lending capacity. We believe this is a powerful instrument to convert unused SDRs into critical resources for our developing member countries, especially considering the 3 to 4 times leverage MDBs provide on equity. We already discussed this option with our board, and we are currently engaging with our shareholders to gather their interest and commitment in participating in this initiative. We already received positive feedback from several countries, but now need additional willing participants to bring this initiative to a successful conclusion. I strongly encourage potential donors to look at this instrument in detail. And I call the countries who have already rejected rechanneling SDR to MDBs to please reconsider their position. MDBs are fully engaged in expanding our balance sheet, and this is a win-win opportunity to make best use of SDR to help developing member countries address their multiple challenges they face. We all together can make a difference, and it's really a pity to miss this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Alok Sharma presided over COP26 in Glasgow and has now joined the Rockefeller Foundation as a Climate and Finance Fellow. Can I please ask you to share your perspective based on your experience since the COP?
Thank you for that, Eric. And just to say that when I came into the room this morning, I saw Dr. Adesina. We had a hug, and he then said to me, "You look a lot more relaxed than you did when you were running the COP." No tie, he said. So thank you for that, brother. But just to say that we are not relaxed about this particular issue. And I want to start by thanking the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and of course, Christine and the whole team at the IMF for everything that has been happening in terms of pushing this initiative forward. The COP presidency, our co-hosts, France and Japan, who made some great interventions as well. And I do think, we heard that, yes, there are technical issues that are outstanding, but actually you can overcome those technical issues. The point of this meeting, and with all the countries speaking, is the political signal that is being sent about the will to get this done and why this is so important. And this is, as Professor Minister Unjugas just said, this is about what is going on across the world. Many of us have seen the impact of climate change in many of the countries that we've been to. And the reality is that they're becoming more frequent and more ferocious. And unless you can make sure that you're supporting countries that are already stretched in terms of their finances, in terms of their balance sheets, I'm afraid we're going to have an increasingly poor outcome for many millions and even billions of people. Look, I think what happened in 2021 with the SDR allocation was actually pretty historic. And as Minister Mitchell has said, the UK played a part in helping to make that happen. But we also have to accept that Africa has only received 5% of that total allocation. That is not acceptable. That is completely unacceptable. And there are billions of SDRs which are sitting in the accounts of developed nations, wealthier nations. That is unacceptable. I will tell you one other thing, and the great thing with not being in government anymore is I can say exactly what I think, which is that if you look at the statistics between 2013 and 2021, of all the money, I'm not talking about sort of SDRs, but all the money that was pledged by developed nations, less than 50% has actually flowed. I mean, that's something that we should actually be pretty ashamed of. So look, I think we've had huge strides with the RSD and the PRGT, but these trusts alone cannot absorb the SDRs that are out there. We know that the model that's been proposed will allow leverage of 3 or 4 times as a result of rechanneling. And frankly, that's why the Rockefeller Foundation has been supporting the AFDB in paving the way for other development banks, not just the AFDB, to increase lending through this use of SDRs. And we heard political support for this rechanneling at the Africa Climate Summit. Many of you were there in Marrakesh. We heard all of this. And so I just want to end with saying that I agree with those friends who have said we can't wait for the next COP and have this discussion again. This is something that should move in Q1 of next year. That's what we ought to be putting our minds to, making sure it's actually starting to flow. And we talk a lot about the millions, the billions, the trillions. It doesn't mean anything. You're on the front line of climate change. So please remember, and I say this particularly to the developed nations, please remember, this is about supporting the most vulnerable people in the world. Please do not, again, fail them.
Very good. Thank you. Now let me turn to Pedro Mariano to share Brazil's perspectives as the incoming G20 presidency and the COP30 presidency on how we continue to move this initiative forward.
Thank you very much, Chair. It is an honor to represent the government of Brazil, the government of President Lula. We will, as a recognition of the utmost importance of this topic, we will have a dedicated task force for climate finance in our G20. We really want to have the Sherpa tracks and the finance track working closely together so that we can have, across-the-board discussions that break this silos and get the more stakeholders to discuss. At this point, I would like to recall some parts of the speech of President Lula in Delhi summit, G20 summit, which I believe are very important for this topic. Quote, "The global financial architecture has changed little since 1945, and the foundations of a new economic governance have not been laid. New emergencies emerged. The challenges accumulated have worsened. We live in a world where wealth is more concentrated, in which millions of human beings still go hungry, in which sustainable development is always threatened, in which governance institutions still reflect the reality of the middle of last century. We will only be able to face all of these problems if we address the issue of pending inequalities. If we want to make a difference, we have to put reducing inequalities at the center of international agenda. Therefore, the Brazilian presidency of the G20 will have three priorities. 1, social inclusion and the fight against hunger. 2, energy transition and sustainable development in its three aspects, social, economic, and environmental. And 3, the reform of global governance institutions. All these three priorities are contained in the motto of Brazilian presidency, which says, building a just world in a sustainable planet. 2 task forces will be created, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and the Global Mobilization against climate change. We need to redouble our efforts to achieve the goal of ending world hunger by 2030, otherwise we will be facing the biggest multilateral failure in recent years. Acting to combat climate change requires political will and determination from governments, as well as resources and technology transfer. We want greater participation of emerging countries in the decisions of the World Bank and the IMF. Unsustainable external debt of the poorest countries need to be addressed. The international community looks at us with hope because we bring together economies from emerging countries and developed countries in the G20. The G20 represents 80% of global GDP and 75% of exports and around 60% of the world's population. To ensure that G20 acts in an inclusive and coherent manner, Brazil intends to organize its work around 3 general guidelines. First, we will make the political and financial tracks coordinate and work in a more integrated way. There is no point in agreeing on the best public policy if we do not allocate the necessary resources for its implementation. Second, we have to listen to society. There are no governments without society. The Brazilian presidency will ensure that engagement groups have the opportunity to report their conclusions and recommendations to representatives. Third and finally, we cannot let geopolitical issues hijack the discussions on the agenda of the various G20 bodies. Quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's quite obvious that this proposal is going to be part of that very important agenda that you just laid out. So thank you to Brazil for carrying the torch forward on this proposal. So as we are very short on time, let me turn now to Dr. Goldfein to wrap us up and take us out.
Thank you very much. I would like to start thanking everybody here for their support. I've heard general support to this initiative of the African Development Bank and the IDB. I would like to thank our staffs that have worked very hard to get here. I want to remind everybody that the channel of SDR is an effort consistent with the recommendations that we all receive from the G7, G20 sponsor capital adequacy framework, and it's crucial for our strategy, our own strategies in our countries and in our development banks. These instruments complements an instrument that has been used, approved and used, the IMF, PIGT and RST. It's a reality. I want to say that I'm very happy from what I heard today because of two important steps at least. One, we heard from the IMF that they are well advanced, staff is well advanced in the work toward bringing to the board soon for the authorization of e-channeling. That's a necessary condition. Second, you've heard today liquidity announcement. I'm very appreciative, we are all appreciative of the announcement we heard today from France, Japan, UK, Spain. Their liquidity support is critical. As a central banker in my previous life as a governor, I know how critical it is, the liquidity, for this instrument become a reserve asset. So what we heard today is a necessary condition. It is a win situation. For every $1 of SDR EBIT capital rechanneling, this leads to a $4 in additional development financing. For the SDR investors, it's an attractive risk-adjusted return of capital, as it benefits from our AAA rating and an additional return. In addition, for all the additionality we heard today. So both steps are necessary condition to allow the channeling of SDRs to be feasible. But we are not there yet. We need actual pledges, at least 5 investors, to make this instrument a reality, let's be clear. So that I propose that we set ourselves a goal. Several of you have just said we cannot wait for the next COP. You just hear it. So why don't we try for maybe as soon as the next IMF World Bank spring meetings in April 2024, that we meet again and see if we can take this last step, or at least the next step, after the 2 important steps that we reached today. Climate and nature emergency demands this from us, demands a swift process. Thank you very much.
Great. Yesterday, I was listening to Prime Minister Motley argue that we must work together to address the climate crisis. In joining us, frankly, grabbing us by the lapels to say, many hands make light work. Perhaps we will never say this about the SDR proposal was light work, especially given all the hard work that the AFDB, the IDB, and the IMF teams have put into it. However, the countries here today committed to making this ingenious proposal to use SDRs to dramatically increase the lending headroom of the AFDB and the IDB form an impressive group. We look forward to working with you, this impressive group, over the next 3 to 4 months so that we can fulfill the request by the Dr. Goldfein to achieve something by the April spring meetings. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.